Double-blind remote viewing session on 3-Eye Atlas shows it is a large object moving through our solar system that is being guided at a distance. Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet explains non-disclosure agreements concerning classified programs which describe jail time for the unauthorized release of program secrets. The James Webb Space Telescope is deliberately showing low-resolution images of 3-Eye Atlas to hide the truth of what it is. The US House of Representatives now has also proposed an amendment to the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act that includes the UAP Disclosure Act. Evidence grows that 3-Eye Atlas is a spacecraft rather than a natural comet based on the discovery of a techno-signature. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to the August 30 edition of Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. We are approaching the end of summer, and I think it's going to be a fascinating autumn here in the Northern Hemisphere. Lots of events that appear to be influenced by these ongoing white hat operations behind the scenes. And what we are witnessing now in places such as Washington, D.C., is that there has been an effort to identify and remove these underground satanic networks. In the Washington, D.C. area, this began with the federalization of the police force. And apparently this was designed to remove petty crime and homelessness on the streets. But in reality, what was being targeted were these satanic networks that involve compromised officials that are compromised in underground SRA rituals, satanic ritual abuse rituals, that influences their performance in public office. So this process of how public officials, and we're talking members of Congress, we're talking members of the judiciary, and members of the economic corporate world are compromised. That was well documented in a book authored by John DeCamp called The Franklin Cover-Up that came out in the late 1990s, showing how boys from a Nebraska orphanage were flown into Washington, D.C. to compromise public officials, and that this involved these SRA ceremonies that invoked demons or reptilian extraterrestrials. This is one of the things that is important for people that are trying to understand just how extensive is this SRA practice in various lodges, whether we're talking Freemasons or other secret societies. How common are these rituals where they invoke these entities? Some call them demons. I believe that this, based on what others have revealed, are actually Draco reptilian extraterrestrials who pop in from a kind of fourth or even fifth density realm into these SRA rituals. Now, what is happening in Washington, D.C. is that you have the federalization of the police force, and the question a lot of people have is, well, is there any evidence that this is really happening? Well, here is a story that came out just a week ago that shows that 20 military attorneys from the Judge Advocate General's office have joined the prosecutors office in Washington, D.C. So the district in Washington, D.C. that handles all prosecutions of criminals and so forth, that is handled by the district attorney of Washington, D.C. And the kind of story goes that she was understaffed because a lot of people that had a lot of prosecutors that had previously been involved in the January 6 prosecutions were sacked or resigned under the present Trump administration. And so apparently the story goes that, well, the office is understaffed, and so they needed these military attorneys to come in. Now, this is where it gets very, very interesting because really, if you are cleaning out these underground networks in the Washington, D.C. area where you have public officials that are being compromised in these rituals run by these secret societies and lodges and so forth, how will people like that be charged? What courts will hear them? And I think the fact that a lot of these SRA ritual abuses compromise public officials, including the judiciary, means that the civil courts have been compromised. So you just can't bring out these officials and say, okay, we're going to prosecute them in the district court and so forth with judges, because a lot of these judges may themselves be targets of the investigation. So the civil courts don't work. And so in such a case, this is where you can actually convene military tribunals. But this is actually one of the justifications for how military tribunals can be invoked when the civil courts don't function. And so this, I think, is what we are witnessing happening now in the Washington, D.C. area, is that because the civil courts have been compromised by these individuals involved in these SRA networks, that military tribunals have been set up, and so they need military prosecutors in those tribunals to prosecute people according to military law, not civilian law. And one of the things about military law, when it comes to prosecuting individuals that have been compromised and have been shown to be doing the bidding of foreign nations, this is when you can actually have very stringent penalties placed on them. So in military courts, if you are convicted of sedition, you can actually be sentenced to death. In the civil courts, if you are convicted of sedition, the maximum penalty is 20 years in jail and or a fine. So clearly, I think that one of the reasons why they are bringing these military prosecutors into the Washington, D.C. District to conduct prosecutions is not just to deal with the staff shortage in the district attorney's office, but to deal with these people who have been caught up, arrested, and are being investigated, who are part of these satanic networks that operated under the Washington, D.C. area. So we're looking for more evidence of that, and I will be sharing that. I did another interview with Redacted on last Thursday, which is where you can actually find out more about this. All right, well, just to kind of like lighten the load a bit, every week I do a video where there is some humor involving the extraterrestrial topic. And so this week I chose this particular segment that deals with Stargate SG-1. And so it's an AI, it's a country parody using AI. Now, unfortunately, because of the music, I cannot play it to you without getting a copyright. But what I recommend that you do is just go to the link below. It'll take you to this video. It goes for just under 4 minutes, and it's a lot of fun. If you're a Stargate fan, you'll get a good laugh out of this. It certainly is a lot of fun to watch. So that is the humor, the exopolitics humor for this week. So I hope you enjoy that. Unfortunately, as I said, I can't play it now for you. All right, so let's now look at the next story. And so this is the interview I did with George Kavasilis that came out last Monday, Escape from the Cabal, AI and God Matrix into an Organic 5D Earth. Now, what George discussed there are essentially 4 phases, 4 stages that the Earth is going through at the moment. And the first stage involves the Cabal, or the deep state, the bloodline ruling families, and their, I guess, defeat. They are collapsing, but nevertheless, there are people who still identify with the Cabal that are part of that world. And so there will be a separation. George says that essentially the Earth is going to separate into four tracks. And as I best understand it, those that identify with the Cabal, they will go to another 3D Earth, and they will continue this experiment. They will continue to live in an environment where you have a hierarchical, competitive organization where those at the top get to lord it over the rest of society. And some people like that because they feel that's a challenge for them, and they like the benefits of being high up in a hierarchy. So that's the escape from the Cabal. So that's the first pathway. The second he identifies is, he calls it technological intelligence or artificial intelligence. A world, and you can see this happening now for people who are identifying more and more, working with artificial intelligence, that they will or are in various stages of embracing transhumanism. You have smart cities coming up, and according to George, what we are witnessing is a transition to a 4th density Earth, where there will be this kind of like technological intelligence operating for those people that choose it, that want to become transhumanists, that are fully comfortable with giving their power away to AI, and that is what is happening. Now, there is another option, the third, which he describes as the God Matrix. And this is a very interesting one. This is where the gods come back. So if you look at all of the major religions, both the ones that are in existence today or those from earlier ages but still have a lot of public appeal, for example, the Anunnaki, the return of the gods means that the principal being in that belief system, whether we're talking about Jehovah for the kind of like Hebrew Jewish faith, or we're talking about Allah for the Muslim faith, or we're talking Kalki for the Indian faith, or we're talking Enki for those that buy into the Sumerian belief system, that these beings are real and they will return, and that the people who identify with them will essentially be taken off planet in a planetary harvest. So this is where you get the idea of the harvest, and that they'll be taken off, and there'll be these very large ships, motherships, even space arcs and so forth, that will be used for the harvest, where people get taken off planet and they get to go with their God, with the being that they identify with, and they become part of that God matrix on another world or in space. Now, and that leads to the fourth stage, which is those people who remain on Earth, and that they will be the people who create a really futuristic might not be the right word, create an organic 5D Earth where people are able to manifest collectively their dreams. And so they work together to manifest an Earth which is free of poverty, free of sickness, free of aging, and where there is abundance and all the things that people value are freely available. You know, if we're talking about being able to live in flying cities and being able to transport yourself through flying vehicles and so forth, that this is all possible on this 5D Earth, which will be in complete harmony with nature. So those that might be visiting this 5D Earth will look at the Earth and see it full of forests and so forth, and not realize that within this 5D forested Earth that you can have a very highly advanced society that is comprising people who have been able to kind of like master their own innate ability to manifest a collective reality around them, which is in alignment with their highest potential. And so, according to George, this means that people who are able to connect with their heart center, with that infinity point within, essentially become creator gods, and you can create this collective reality around you. So very interesting information. People are really resonating with George's information. So if you haven't yet listened to George Kavassilis, then I recommend you do so. He truly has some unique information to share that I think pretty accurately describes the kind of divisions that humanity is going to undergo as a result of the unfolding in these planet-wide events over the next decade or so. Okay, so here is another article by Michael Sharp, who writes with who has his own blog site, and in here he talks about the pressure and intimidation on witnesses and scientists and researchers with first-hand information on classified UFO programs. So he describes the example of Michael Herrera, whose eyewitness account of an alien reproduction vehicle involved in recruiting psychic children in Indonesia. That case is examined along with the pressure that was put on him to remain silent. So some people were happy for Herrera to come forward, talk about him seeing some kind of flying saucer craft, but weren't happy with him identifying it as something that had been reverse engineered, something that wasn't alien, but it was reverse engineered because he could see rivets and so forth along the fuselage of this craft. So this is a very good article to get a lot more information about the Michael Herrera's eyewitness account, as well as other researchers and witnesses who are having a lot of pressure placed on them to remain silent. And this apparently is something that is happening right now. There's a lot of intimidation happening behind the scenes, and even there have been cases where whistleblowers or witnesses have been killed, and these are being investigated. Now, we don't know too much about that other than some of the classic whistleblower cases, such as Phil Schneider, William Cooper, and a few others that are more recent, who died in mysterious circumstances. Okay, so here is a tweet by Dr. John Brandenburg, and he said, be prepared, 3i Atlas may turn towards Earth, triggering an attempted coup by the secret UFO government. Thus, the armed National Guard deployment in DC as a deterrent. This scenario occurs in Morningstar Pass, the collapse of the UFO cover-up, soon to be a major movie. So that's very interesting that there is this book, The Morningstar Pass, and that it describes a scenario very similar to what we are seeing unfold now. So that what that brings to mind is, well, is this a case of predictive programming, that a movie like this, that well, actually, it's a book that was authored, and it is going to become a major movie. So is the book and the movie part of this kind of predictive programming, where the Majestic 12 or the secret government is trying to condition humanity so that they can try and pull off something with 3i Atlas turning towards Earth, and therefore that triggering a mass panic. Now, what's interesting is that George Cavasilis, he says that he's in touch with a group of admirals that he calls Jedi admirals, because they got enlightened in deep space and have come back to help the rest of humanity essentially evolve, with the final result being that we join the galactic community. And so he says that these admirals told George that 3i Atlas is part of the Solar Warden fleet, that it's actually a stealth craft that is flying through the solar system in the route that 3i Atlas is taking, and that it is going to do things, and course correction is among those things, where it will awaken humanity. So it's very interesting. So you got, on the one hand, this book, the Morningstar book, that depicts a comet coming towards Earth, or an object coming towards Earth and moving, and that triggers an attempted coup by the deep state. Whereas in George's case, the 3i Atlas deviating in its path will actually play a role in awakening humanity. So I guess you could have both happening at the same time, that the deep state is aware that 3i Atlas is part of the Solar Warden program, that it's a craft rather than a natural comet, and that it's going to deviate. And so the deep state may use its legacy media assets to be able to depict any such deviation as something that is suggesting a kind of threat or an alien invasion, whereas George is saying, well, the white hats, they will kind of like co-opt any attempt by the deep state to kind of like misrepresent what 3i Atlas is, and that way people will realize that it's actually not a threat at all, that it's actually friendly. So very, very interesting. The next few months are going to be fascinating as we head into autumn and we kind of like see 3i Atlas fly closer to Earth than Venus and some of the other major planets. All right, so here is something that was posted by Michael Herrera that I thought was well worth commenting on, and that is, well, he says, everyone needs to understand that it's highly probable that whistleblowers coming forward to the government and the government is willing, is because it's a way for the deep state to map out whistleblower networks and to compromise them. So what he's talking about here is the creation of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which ostensibly is done to give whistleblowers protection so that they can share their stories. But what in fact it's been doing is that, yes, it gets whistleblowers to come in, share their stories, but nothing is done with those stories. The public doesn't learn about them because the Arrow office says, well, there's no evidence supporting these stories. And what it does is that it gives the deep state a way to map out what the whistleblowers are doing, who they're working with, and it allows them to kind of infiltrate these whistleblowers networks in an attempt to essentially compromise them. So that's what Michael Herrera has been warning us, or he's warning us about in this July 20 tweet. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that in addition to the deep state tracking whistleblowers when they come forward, there's also a process whereby the white hats or the positive extraterrestrials track and identify those in the deep state performing such actions in a counterintelligence operation designed to protect whistleblowers. So on the one hand, you got the Arrow office kind of luring whistleblowers to come out, give their testimony, which are then recorded, but nothing is done with them. But it gives the black hats a way to kind of like target the whistleblowers and the networks that they are part of, to compromise them in some way. But it also gives the white hats a means of tracking what the deep state is doing and identifying their operatives. So it is, we are truly in the midst of a war between black hats and white hats. And, as I said earlier, Washington, D.C. and other cities in the United States are presently having their underground networks used by the cabal, used by the deep state, the SRA and other illicit activities, as well as bases and so forth. These are currently being raided. High-level people are being arrested. And so I think there's this process whereby the deep state, the cabal, has been tracking people and using their resources to kind of interfere with whistleblowers and so forth. But in doing so, it allows the white hats to track the black hats and find out where they're operating from and then raid those bases, or raid those underground systems. So that's very, very interesting. All right, here is a fascinating double-blind remote viewing session on 3i Atlas. And double-blind remote viewing is very important because what it does is that it shields the remote viewer from the telepathic influence of a targeter who is familiar with the targets. So those groups that do single blind remote viewing, that actually is not recommended by the people who have developed remote viewing or developed military grade remote viewing, because they understood that the targeter, the person who hands over the alphanumeric code for the target, if they know what the target is, that the remote viewer can pick up telepathically information about that target, or pick up what the targeter knows about that target or wants or believes, and kind of like give back information that conforms with that. So it's like you get the process compromised. So that's why that's why military grade remote viewing is double blind. So the targeter who interacts with the remote viewer doesn't know what the target is. All he knows or she knows is the alphanumeric code. And that alphanumeric code is generated by a first targeter, another targeter who generates it for the particular target that the first targeter has chosen. So you actually have two targeters in the double-blind remote viewing. So what happened here was Dick Allgaier, who is a very talented remote viewer. He does a remote viewing of Comet 3I Atlas. So let me just play you the first part of his of what he has to say about his session.
Interesting remote viewing target. I was given this target ID A1R0-L1N0. This was worked double blind with no monitoring, meaning someone emailed me this target ID. I didn't know who generated the target. I had no communication with anyone. No one monitored me. This is some of the data that I produced. Remote viewing, the experience for the viewer has any range of things. You can get ideas, you can get shadowy images, you can write down columns of words, you can get conceptual data, all of it valid. But for me, the money shot, the really amazing part, is when you have an experiential full visual, and it doesn't happen every time. And in this case, it did, and it was a remarkable experience for me. So I want to take you through some of this data produced under double-blind protocol on target A1R0-L1N0. Had my desk set up, I did a cool down. I was doing it at 1330 sidereal when the mass of the center of the Milky Way, the noise of the center of the Milky Way, is shielded by the Earth. And it's thought that your psiability is enhanced at that time. And certainly for me on this target, it seemed to work. So the first thing I got when I addressed this target and had...
Okay, so the whole segment goes for 6.5 minutes. So I don't want to play the whole thing for you. But you can go to Future Forecasting Group. That's the YouTube channel of Dick Allgaier, where he goes into some of the data of what it was that he saw. And you can see what looks like 3I Atlas, because that's what the target was. And what he said was that 3I Atlas was actually being guided by a craft, a vehicle nearby. So he said it's a comet that was being guided by a stealth spacecraft that was steering it in the direction that it wanted it to go. So that's very interesting, because it suggests that, well, there is an artificial, or there is a spacecraft associated with 3I Atlas, but it's controlling or steering the 3I Atlas in its trajectory. So that kind of like corroborates some of the earlier information I discussed, where 3I Atlas would undergo a course change at some point, and that could either trigger the Black Hats trying to move forward with some kind of martial law or some kind of false flag event, or it could trigger what George Kavasilis was saying, that the White Hats would use this as a means of awakening the public, the world public, that, oh, wow, 3I Atlas is not a comet at all, that it's actually some kind of spacecraft, or it's associated with some kind of spacecraft, which would generate unprecedented public interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial life and spacecraft using exotic technologies and so forth. So I do recommend you watch this video teaser, and it is something that is part of a larger remote viewing project that was examining Comet 3I Atlas, conducted by the Future Forecasting Group. So you can go to their website and watch the full segment, where you have multiple remote viewers sharing their data on this object. Here we have Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who explains standard non-disclosure agreements concerning classified programs which describe jail time for the unauthorized release of program secrets. So let me play you this video segment where we get to hear what he has to say about these non-disclosure agreements and his direct personal knowledge of those, and how they truly do hinder whistleblowers from coming forward. So let's play this.
I knew people who touched the legacy program. I know them, and many of them are out already. Eric Davis, Hal Putoff, Jay Stratton was not in the legacy program, but he led the UAP task force. So he's seen a ton of UAP information that's not been declassified. And I trust him. Lou Elizondo, I trust him too. So these have all been in the mix, Carl Nell, and we're all saying the same thing. There's a lot of information that's being withheld from the public. Some of it should be released, and the full story.
And what's stopping all this from being released? Like what?
It's the classification issue. Is we're too afraid.
What are people scared of?
Well, it's the government not really thinking it's good policy to say we can't protect our citizens, our airspace, our water space. That's a tough one to overcome.
Sure, I understand that.
And I'm not sure how they resolve that myself. Again, I'm here from the standpoint that the American people, we're a government by the people, for the people, that they deserve to know the nature of reality, and the government knows it. They should disclose some of that to our taxpayers.
And what is to stop like any of these people who have this top secret information, like from just coming out and saying it? Like what? Like other than losing your career,
jail time.
You could go to jail.
Oh yeah, these are all.
But wouldn't that just confirm it? If I came out tomorrow and I was part of some like deep access program.
What we're talking about is, and I've signed these myself. You get read into a program, and you have a non-disclosure form that says, I acknowledge that if I divulge any of the information in this program, and it's a prerequisite before getting into the program. So you might not even know you're getting read into a UAP program. It might be, hey, we want to have you know about this because of your responsibilities, and we think you have a need to know. So first, before you get read in, sign this, and it says, I won't do anything, or I can go to jail.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, yes.
But the problem with that is in the public's eye, if you do come out and say some crazy stuff that I'm claiming this is true, and then you get thrown into jail, people are going to say, oh my God, it's true. They threw him in jail.
Yeah.
If it was bullshit, why would they put him in jail?
Well, so the good thing here is these, I don't know if they've been passed yet, but maybe I know that Burchett has introduced some whistleblower protection legislation to get around that.
So there you have Tim Gallaudet sharing some information about how these non-disclosure agreements operate, whereby before the person is read into the program, they have to sign them, and that it actually explicitly says that there is jail time involved. And what Danny Jones' question of, well, wouldn't the public kind of like side with the whistleblower or make it a big issue once they learned that the whistleblower was jailed because of what they were revealing? Well, I think the important point that needs to be brought out here is that in many cases, the public wouldn't know that this person has been jailed. The public wouldn't be given details of the case. And the legacy media goes along with this because if any editor of a major newspaper gets approached by the national security apparatus and they're told, well, this case deals with national security, we don't want you to write about it, the public wouldn't know. They wouldn't know that whistleblower was jailed. So that's the problem with this. Now, the thing that I wanted to bring out in discussing this is that I've heard from other whistleblowers that when it comes to some of the more sensitive UFO-related programs, when they're read in, they, in addition to being told that they can experience jail time for unauthorized release program secrets, that they can actually be terminated with extreme prejudice. So Phil Schneider, Derek Hennessy, are two whistleblowers that have talked about this. There have been others that have talked about it. Termination with extreme prejudice, that's where someone is essentially assassinated in a really horrible way. I mean, with Phil Schneider, I mean, he was hanged using, I think, chicken wire or something like that in his apartment, and it was made to look like a suicide. But the people who knew Phil Schneider at the time were saying that there's no way he would have done anything like that. That he was really on a mission to reveal what he knew. But he was eliminated with terminated with extreme prejudice. And Derek Hennessy, if you go to my website exopolitics.org and just add the term Derek Hennessy, you'll come up with an article where I discuss. It was about 5 hours of interview time that Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens did with Derek Hennessy, also known as Connor O'Ryan, where he talked about the process of termination with extreme prejudice and how he was actually part of this secret hit team, and that involved some high-level public officials such as Dick Cheney. That's an interesting one right there. That there was, out of the S4 facility at Area 51, there was an assassination unit where these Black SEALs, and we're talking about former Navy SEALs who have had all records of them scrubbed, and they work for the Majestic 12 group, and that they would be used in assassination of people who were a threat to the disclosure process. So Hennessy described how he, for example, traveled to Europe and he assassinated a Green Beret who was disclosing too much information about the UFO extraterrestrial cover-up, and that then he was brought to S4 at Area 51 and just did security work, and that was part of his cool-down process. So kind of fascinating information. So we know a lot about how these people who have been leaking information have been terminated with extreme prejudice. So it's much more than just jail time, which is what Tim Gallaudet described, that people who disclose this information, who have signed non-disclosure agreements concerning the most sensitive UFO-related programs, that they also face this termination with extreme prejudice. So here's a summary of the difference between personality cults and true teachers in the UFO movement. It was something I discussed in last week's Week in Review, and I thought that this summary was so important, or that this issue was so important, that I put it on TikTok. So essentially, just as a reminder, is that personality cults are something that, when it comes to the UFO issue, involve someone, a charismatic person who is a contactee or is in communication with extraterrestrials, presenting a lot of information that makes them popular, and they gain the attention of large numbers of people, and they kind of like unconsciously progress from being very humble and open, typically at the beginning, to where they now become like these gurus, or they are now at the center of a personality cult. So in this segment, I actually just go over the information that helps us identify the difference between a personality cult and true teachers in the UFO movement. And just to kind of like cut to the chase, I mean, the personality cult leader will not tolerate dissent. They will not allow people to criticize them because they view it as something indicating disloyalty and something that is confusing to the rest of the followers. And so they eschew anyone or cast out anyone who comes up with a criticism or asks question that really gets people to kind of like ask or question whether or not that that teacher is who he claims to be. And I think that's a really important sign right there, that if anyone is presenting information in the UFO field that's predicated on them being in contact with or communication with extraterrestrials, and if they can't take criticism, if they can't deal with questions, then walk away. I mean, that's really the best thing to do. Walk away, because what you have there is really some of the most telltale signs of a personality cult. Because really, anyone that is truly having contact with extraterrestrials, you would welcome questions and critical questions, especially where you would have to give more detailed information about the contact, and it kind of like, I think it brings out the best in someone who's genuinely having contact. But if someone is embellishing or using the information to promote themselves, such questions are regarded as a threat, and so they're eschewed. So yeah, this TikTok segment, you will have it in the description, the link to it. So I recommend going to it. It only goes for just over 4 minutes, and it's well worth listening to, just to kind of like get clarity on the differences between the personality cult leader and the true teacher. Okay, so here is an announcement from the US Space Force, and it talks about Space Force and 9 allied nations that concluded the Shriver War Games in 2025 recently, a 2-week exercise focused on space strategy, future tech assessment, and international collaboration. So these nations, they involved the Five Eyes countries, that is Canada, United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, along with France, Germany, and also 2 other states that were an observing capacity, which is Italy and Norway. And why this is important is because this kind of allied space operations or exercises involving those countries who are part of a program called Olympic Defender, that I believe is the hub or the core of what will eventually become a future Starfleet. I might not use the word Starfleet, but something like it that's depicted in the Star Trek series. Now, why would that be? Well, the Star Trek series is actually the model that the US Space Force is striving for, that this is something that was presented in a seminar in 2019 that took place at Peterson Space Force Base, where you actually had future scenarios by the year 2060. So they were looking ahead at that time, 40 years ahead, and they said, well, what kind of scenarios could we expect in 40 years' time? And they came up with 4 scenarios where the United States would be dominant in space, and 3 other scenarios where China would be dominant in space. And the most optimal scenario for the US in terms of the future was, they called it a Star Trek future. And so that is what Space Force is striving for, a Star Trek future. And I actually wrote a book about this called Space Force and Our Star Trek Future. So definitely, if you want to get more details about that, you can go to my book, Space Force and a Star Trek Future. Okay, here's my interview with JP. There's an update. Now, for those that do not know who JP is, he is former U.S. Army. He served for 4 years in the U.S. Army, and he served out of Eglin Air Force Base, which is very curious for people. Why would an Army serviceman operate out of Eglin Air Force Base? Well, one of the reasons was that JP was participating in covert space missions that were part of the secret space program run by Space Command and Space Force. And that in his missions, he got to be taken off-world, and he was taken also into the interior of the planet, where he got to meet a variety of beings. So in this update, so update 49, he met with a Nordic interdimensional angel. And the interesting thing, when JP says he began talking to this Nordic, he asked him, well, where do you come from? And the Nordic said he came from the past, the future, and the present, and that he could move freely through space and time. And that's very interesting. And he had a kind of spacecraft further away in the woods that facilitated that kind of travel. And he said that he and others have been guiding humanity through the ages and were considered to be angels in ancient civilizations. So that's why I came up with that title, Meeting a Nordic Interdimensional Angel. And this raises very interesting questions about these Nordic extraterrestrials, that they're not necessarily from other planets, such as the Pleiades, nor are they necessarily from the inner Earth, which we might think may be the case for some of these beings. And JP has met Nordics from the inner Earth, that there are these Nordics that operate through time, and that they move freely through time, and they don't identify with any one place or any one time. So you can understand now why, if you ask them, where are you from, they might say, I'm from the past, future, and present, that there is no one time, that they just go back and forth. So, we could infer from that these are very highly evolved beings. Angels certainly is one way of describing such highly evolved beings. Another one is Elohim. And so this then takes us into the realm of religion, and especially texts that describe these kinds of angels or Elohim that could move through space and time and interact with believers. So very fascinating update there. And JP said that he felt very positive energies coming from this Nordic, who told JP that there were others that looked like him, but that they were working for the dark side. So right there, you have fallen angels, or what some might call synthetic Nordics, Nordic hybrids controlled by reptilians or controlled by AI. I mean, there could be a number of scenarios. And that what JP learned from this experience was that you need to be able to discern the difference between these kind of righteous angels and the fallen angels. And that, interestingly, is what happened in the book of Enoch, that you had this war between fallen angels and righteous angels. And of course, many in the religious community take the book of Enoch as just being metaphor, that this was a spiritual warfare. It had nothing to do with real life physical events. But in fact, there are authors that describe the book of Enoch as actually having a lot to do with physical beings, both fallen angels and righteous angels. So I expect that in future updates with JP, we're probably going to learn a lot more of these beings. And this being gave JP a gift, which we showed in the video, and people have offered a number of explanations for this gift, and JP showed it, and we're investigating that and we'll let you know what we find through our investigation of that gift. That could either be a pine cone, or it could be a seed of a giant sequoia tree or a redwood. People have offered both of those explanations, and we are exploring which one is the case. All right, so that's JP's update 49. Here is someone who has been very active in studying crop circles for well over a decade. He's a scientist, and he has looked at some of the data concerning the 3-eye atlas, and he looked at some of the imagery that was issued by the James Webb Space Telescope, that the first telescope that caught the 3-eye atlas, that telescope had less power than the James Webb Space Telescope, but that the James Webb Space Telescope's image had much worse resolution. And so here he goes through the details of why the James Webb Space Telescope should have taken a less pixelated version of 3-eye atlas, and what he concludes is that the people at the James Webb Space Telescope added fake pixelation to the image of 3-eye atlas, so that no one would be able to see important details in the coma or central core, the exact size of which we do not know yet. So already there is a cover-up of what 3-eye atlas really is, that the space telescope that first identified 3-eye atlas back in, I think it was July 1st of this year, that was using the Atlas telescope system, and that was provided imagery that was not nearly as, let's just say, powerful or high resolution as you could get from the James Webb Space Telescope. And someone used the James Webb Space Telescope to focus in on 3-eye atlas to get more highly accurate, less pixelated images of 3-eye atlas. But instead, what the public was given was a more highly pixelated version than the original. So Dr. Horace Drew has drawn attention to that. So the conclusion is that James Webb Space Telescope is deliberately showing low-resolution images of 3-eye atlas to hide the truth of what it is. All right, here is a development that is worth taking a look at, and this is the House of Representatives has now submitted its own version of the UAP Disclosure Act. Now, I discussed this a couple of weeks ago, where the UAP Disclosure Act that had been previously submitted through the US Senate in 2023 and 2024. And in both cases, the House of Representatives did not have its own version of this. So now in 2025, the UAP Disclosure Act has been resubmitted to the US Senate for inclusion in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026. But now there's a House version. And so in this tweet, you have all the details about how this House version was submitted by Congressman Eric Burleson, and the different ways in which it could be incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act. So it's quite detailed. I won't go into it other than just say that the ultimate fate of this House of Representatives version rests on the current chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, who is Mike Rogers, and whether he supports it or not. Now, in previous years, 2023, 2024, he did not support it, which is why it got nowhere. He didn't support it in the reconciliation committee between the House of Representatives and the US Senate when they looked at their different versions. And the Senate had the UAP Disclosure Act, but the House of Representatives didn't. So Mike Rogers now is going to really determine whether or not the UAP Disclosure Act will be part of the House version. And if it is, then there'll be votes and so forth. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Okay, so here is a story that concerns a crowdsourced report that showed over 8,000 sightings of unidentified metallic orbs, typically near US bases. So now this study, it looked at over 8,000 orbs from December 2022 to June 2025. Now, this has been discussed by many people who have looked at the metallic orbs that have been seen near military bases. So I don't want to go into that because there's a lot of statistics and a lot of reports, including a report from the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office that referred to these metallic orb sightings and how they form the majority of UFO sightings in the year of those reports or of that particular report submitted by the ARRA office. But what I wanted to point out here is that these metallic orb sightings began around the same time that JP, and he was serving in the US Army at the time, says that he was taken to a Nordic spaceport in the Alabama region and was told that their spacecraft, including orbs, would begin revealing themselves to humanity. So that was back in February 2023, pretty close to the beginning of the metallic orb sightings. And so he predicted this. And of course now, since his prediction back in early 2023, there have been over 8,000 of these metallic orb sightings. So I see this as a corroboration, important corroboration for JP and his reports of going into these different bases. All right, so here is another piece of evidence that's come forward that shows that 3I Atlas is a spacecraft rather than a natural comet. Again, this comes from Dr. Horace Drew, and he identified a technosignature involving nickel and cyanide in the gaseous coma of 3I Atlas, but not iron. The data seems to rule out an iron-nickel meteorite and suggest instead a very large alien spacecraft. So he goes into the kind of like metallic composition of 3I Atlas and how that is more consistent with a spacecraft as opposed to some comet which is emitting nickel organically. So, I mean, it's a pretty technical explanation, so I don't want to go into it. I mean, I certainly don't have that kind of expertise in metals analysis, but I think it is very worth exploring or understanding that according to Dr. Horace Drew, that this is evidence of a technosignature, that it's not something that a natural body can emit. And he kind of uses the analogy of the car paint. If car paint peels off, you can examine that paint, the alloys used in it, and you can say, well, this is not something that naturally occurs, but it is something that is suggestive of some kind of manufacturing process. So similarly, the analysis of the gases and so forth being emitted from 3I Atlas point to it being a spacecraft rather than a natural comet. So I think the next few months are going to be really fascinating as far as 3I Atlas is concerned, in terms of, is it going to undergo a course correction, and if so, how will that impact humanity? What's going to happen as it kind of like approaches the Earth later in the year? I believe it's October and so forth. We'll find out. Well, this brings me to the final thing I want to discuss today, which is the webinar that I'm going to be conducting in September. And this webinar concerns the collapse of the deep state and us entering into the galactic community. Because, as I mentioned earlier, with my story concerning the raids or the federalization of police in the Washington, D.C. area. And Jazz, can you put up the banner, please? Thank you. And so what that suggests is that there is a cleanup operation happening in the Washington, D.C. area. And similar things are happening in other major cities of the United States and around the world, that the White Hats, the Earth Alliance, comprising both military leaders and also positive extraterrestrials who are working together to go into these underground facilities. Some of them are more than 10 miles deep, and they are being identified and cleaned out. So basically the bases used by the deep state to hide and conduct its worldwide operations are being identified, raided, and cleaned out. And that the individuals that have been running these deep state programs are being arrested. They're being put into special tribunals. And this is the process that we are witnessing right now. And what that suggests is that the deep state is in a process of collapse, that what we are witnessing right now with 3I Atlas may well be the final card that will be played by the deep state, which is the fake alien invasion card. So in this upcoming webinar, I will be joined by two special panelists, James Gilliland, who has been a contactee for over 40 years. He's been photographing craft for decades at his SETI retreat in Mount Adams. And also Laura Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower, who is really carrying on the work of the former president in terms of helping the American public learn about the existence of extraterrestrial life and how this was kind of co-opted by the deep state. Think of Eisenhower's famous farewell address warning about the dangers of the military-industrial congressional complex. And so Laura is very familiar with that. And then finally, there'll be a Q&A. So the whole thing will run for close to 5 hours, and it is well worth attending. It's going to be on September 13, starting at 3 p.m. East Coast time. So I highly recommend that you watch it so that you are prepared for the full extent of the enormous changes that are coming our way as the deep state collapses, and we are witnessing it. I mean, it's been predicted for many, many years, and now we are watching it happen in real time. So it's a very exciting time. And so the more familiar you are with that, the better, because ultimately this is a collective process where collective humanity, people who are informed of the full extent of what's going on, when you give your assent to this, when you say, yeah, I want those bastards arrested and tried and so forth, then you are actually empowering the positive extraterrestrials and white hats to do this. So it really is important that as many of us as possible learn about this and give our collective assent and say, yeah, we support this. We want this to happen. All right, well, that's it for this week's Week in Review. I want to thank you for joining, and a special shout out to all my Patreon subscribers. I really appreciate anyone who joins Patreon. You support this channel. You get the benefit of watching all the Exopolitics Today interviews that come out every week. We have up to 3, including the Week in Review. And you get to watch those ad-free. You get early access to those. And also you get to watch them in a censor-free environment. And finally, you get discounts for my webinars. And I actually introduced a new tier. So this is a Galactic Patron tier where you can actually watch all my panel webinars. That's included in the price, and that'll be very handy for those that subscribe, that you get to watch all my panel webinars, and they'll be available on Patreon, and you can watch webinars since with this upcoming webinar. You'll be able to watch past webinars up to this September 13 webinar. So again, thank you and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.